What's the first thing that comes to your mind when I say Ethiopia? Some of you may think just another African country, others may think conflict, instability, war. But today Ethiopia is in news because the Indian Prime Minister is there. But why is he there? Well, this story is about answering that question. Why is he there? Prime Minister Modi is on a three-nation tour. The first stop was Jordan. From there, it was a quick flight to Ethiopia. That's the second leg of his trip. And it wasn't a courtesy stop.
Honorable members, today, Indian companies are among the largest foreign investors in Ethiopia. They have invested more than $5 billion in diverse sectors like textiles, manufacturing, agriculture, health, and more. And they have created.
Your visit, Mr. Prime Minister, is beyond a diplomatic occasion. It is a meeting of two nations that understand how careful planning and bold ideas can fuel transformation. Mr. Prime Minister, Ethiopia and India stand at the threshold of great opportunities. Our history is long, our bonds are deep, but the most
Ethiopia didn't wait for permission, it went where the jobs were. While Washington debated frameworks and timelines, India moved fast. Factories were built, machines were installed, workers were trained, and $5 billion turned into 75,000 real jobs on the ground. This wasn't about politics, it was about urgency. Ethiopia had a growing population and no time for hesitation. India brought capital tied to production, not promises. The result was immediate momentum, exports rising, skills spreading, and entire regions waking up economically. The United States wasn't pushed out, it was outpaced. Because in today's global economy, influence doesn't belong to whoever speaks the loudest, it belongs to whoever delivers first. The shift began quietly, without declarations or public ceremony. Ethiopia did not announce a pivot away from the United States. It simply redirected attention. Meetings changed location, delegations altered composition, investment roadmaps were revised. By the time observers noticed, the direction was already set. India had moved into position. For years, Ethiopia balanced relationships carefully, engaging with multiple partners while guarding its long-term priorities. Infrastructure gaps, industrialization goals, and employment pressures demanded scale, patience, and speed. What Ethiopia needed most was not short-term capital, but integrated investment tied directly to production. And jobs. India understood this instinctively. Rather than approaching Ethiopia as a market alone, India approached it as a manufacturing partner. Proposals focused on industrial zones, skill transfer, supply chains, and export-oriented production. Capital came bundled with training, technology, and timelines. $5 billion followed. The investment did not arrive as a single transaction. It unfolded across sectors: textiles, pharmaceuticals, automotive components, agricultural processing. Each project was structured to absorb labor at scale, not merely extract returns. Ethiopia measured success differently. The question was not how much capital entered the country, but how many people it employed. 75,000 jobs became the reference point, not projected, not promised, created. Factories rose outside major cities. Power connections expanded. Logistics corridors adjusted. Industrial parks filled with machinery and movement. For thousands of Ethiopians, employment became tangible rather than theoretical. The United States watched with polite distance. American engagement had not vanished, but it had slowed. Risk assessments grew conservative, conditionalities multiplied, timeframes stretched. Ethiopia, under pressure to deliver jobs quickly, found delays costly. India did not delay. Indian firms adapted to local conditions. Production models accounted for infrastructure variability. Training programs were embedded into operations. Rather than importing entire workforces, India invested in building one. This approach resonated. Ethiopia did not view the investment as dependency. It viewed it as alignment. India sought manufacturing scale. Ethiopia sought employment. The overlap was substantial. The contrast with the United States became unavoidable. American investment proposals emphasized governance frameworks, regulatory reform, and long-term benchmarks. Ethiopia acknowledged their importance but faced immediate realities. Youth unemployment carried political and social consequences. Speed mattered. India delivered speed without spectacle. As jobs materialized, confidence followed. Domestic suppliers emerged around industrial zones. Transport services expanded, housing demand increased, employment multiplied beyond factory gates. 75,000 jobs became a floor, not a ceiling. Ethiopia framed the partnership pragmatically. This was not a rejection of the United States. It was a recalibration of urgency. Ethiopia needed partners prepared to move at the pace of its demographic reality. India fit that requirement. The investment reshaped regional perceptions. Neighboring countries observed Ethiopia's industrial acceleration closely. The model challenged assumptions that large-scale job creation required Western capital exclusively. India demonstrated an alternative path grounded in shared development trajectories. Ethiopia's leadership emphasized sovereignty. Agreements were structured to retain domestic oversight. Equity participation remained balanced. Export revenues were reinvested locally. Ethiopia avoided the pitfalls of enclave development by insisting on integration. India accepted these terms. This acceptance mattered. It signaled respect rather than leverage. Ethiopia did not feel managed. It felt partnered. The United States, by contrast, appeared cautious. Internal debates slowed decision-making. Concerns over exposure and compliance delayed commitments. Ethiopia interpreted hesitation not as hostility, but as misalignment. Jobs could not wait. As factories reached capacity, skills advanced. Workers transitioned from basic assembly to technical roles. Productivity improved, wages stabilized, consumer demand increased, the economic ripple widened, Ethiopia's industrial base diversified, export profiles expanded, trade balances shifted incrementally. While challenges persisted, momentum was undeniable. India benefited as, well, supply chains diversified away from congestion, production costs stabilized, market access improved. The partnership strengthened India's presence in Africa without triggering dependency narratives. The United States faced a dilemma: re-engage aggressively and adapt, or accept reduced influence. Ethiopia did not close doors, but it no longer waited at them. This subtle shift carried weight. For decades, African countries had been framed as recipients of opportunity. Ethiopia reversed that framing. It positioned itself as a platform offering scale, labor, and ambition. India responded with commitment. $5 billion became more than a figure. It became evidence that alternative partnerships could deliver tangible outcomes quickly. Ethiopia's choice reverberated. It suggested that alignment mattered more than tradition, that shared development logic could outperform legacy relationships, that speed and integration trumped caution when employment was at stake. The United States remained a player, but no longer the default. Ethiopia's pivot was not ideological, it was operational. Jobs had been created, factories were running, timelines were met. 75,000 people were employed. That outcome defined the decision more clearly than any statement could. The partnership moved forward quietly, without fanfare, driven by production schedules rather than press releases. Ethiopia had made its choice not against someone, but for itself. India had met the moment, and the consequences were already reshaping Ethiopia's economic landscape. As production stabilized and employment expanded, Ethiopia's decision began reshaping how development partnerships were evaluated across the continent. The focus shifted from promises to performance, from announcements to absorption capacity. What mattered most was not who invested, but how investment translated into livelihoods. India's presence in Ethiopia deepened without spectacle. Factories moved from pilot phases into full-scale operations. Output targets were met, supply chains matured, local firms integrated as component suppliers rather than peripheral service providers. Ethiopia's insistence on domestic linkage proved decisive. This integration changed outcomes. Jobs created inside industrial zones triggered secondary employment beyond them. Transport operators expanded fleets, food suppliers scaled operations. Construction accelerated around new employment centers. What began as industrial investment evolved into regional economic stimulation. Ethiopia tracked these effects closely. Employment metrics replaced abstract growth figures as indicators of success. 75,000 jobs became a benchmark referenced in planning documents. and regional forums, the figure carried symbolic weight, not as propaganda but as proof of execution. India's approach contrasted sharply with prior experiences. Instead of prioritizing extractive efficiency, Indian firms prioritized continuity. Downtime was minimized, maintenance systems were localized, training pipelines ensured workforce replacement without disruption. Ethiopia valued this reliability. The relationship matured into operational trust rather than diplomatic alignment. Decisions were resolved at factory floors as often as in meeting rooms. That proximity shortened feedback loops and accelerated improvement. The United States remained present but peripheral. Engagement continued through existing channels, but momentum favored partners delivering immediate impact. Ethiopia did not dismiss long-term reform. It simply refused to subordinate employment urgency to prolonged negotiation. This recalibration was widely observed. Other African countries began reassessing engagement strategies. Ethiopia's experience demonstrated that scale manufacturing was viable outside traditional Western frameworks. It challenged the assumption that labor-intensive industrialization required Western capital dominance. India's role became a reference point, not as a template, but as an alternative. Ethiopia maintained strategic balance. No exclusivity clauses bound future partnerships. The country preserved flexibility. The difference was psychological. Ethiopia no longer approached negotiations from deficit. Employment success strengthened confidence. Confidence altered bargaining posture. Terms became clearer, expectations firmer, timeframes shorter. India adjusted seamlessly. Indian firms accepted performance-linked incentives rather than open-ended concessions. Accountability was mutual. Ethiopia monitored compliance rigorously. This discipline reinforced credibility. The labor force evolved. Workers gained technical skills transferable across sectors. Productivity gains increased wages gradually. Household stability improved. The social impact extended beyond income to predictability. Predictability mattered. It reduced migration pressure, it eased urban congestion, it stabilized consumption patterns. Ethiopia's internal dynamics shifted incrementally toward balance. The United States observed these changes with renewed interest. Re-engagement discussions emerged, but the context had changed. Ethiopia no longer sought validation, it sought alignment with its priorities. Jobs first, infrastructure followed, markets expanded. India's $5 billion investment catalyzed confidence beyond its numerical value. It demonstrated that capital paired with operational commitment could overcome structural constraints. Ethiopia did not ignore challenges. Infrastructure strain persisted. Energy supply required expansion. Regulatory coordination demanded constant adjustment, but the presence of active industry created urgency for solutions. Problems tied to production tend to be solved faster than abstract ones. Ethiopia leveraged momentum, revenue from exports funded grid upgrades, tax receipts supported logistics expansion, policy reforms aligned with industrial needs rather than donor schedules. This self-reinforcing loop strengthened autonomy. India benefited as well. Supply diversification reduced risk, manufacturing footprints expanded, export capacity increased. The partnership enhanced India's economic positioning without dependency optics. The United States faced a strategic choice: adapt engagement models to match speed and integration or accept reduced influence. Ethiopia did not close doors, but it did not pause progress either. Time favored those prepared to move. The partnership reframed narratives around Africa's agency. Ethiopia demonstrated that choosing partners was not ideological alignment, but operational calculus. Employment outcomes justified decisions more effectively than rhetoric. 75,000 jobs anchored that calculus. The figure circulated in policy circles not as boast, but as data point. It altered expectations. If Ethiopia could achieve this scale, others could too. Africa's development discourse shifted subtly. Industrialization regained credibility. Job-centric growth replaced extractive dependency as a plausible pathway. Ethiopia's experience lent weight to this shift. India emerged as a partner attuned to these realities. Not perfect, not dominant, but aligned. The United States retained strengths: technology, capital depth, market access. But alignment required recalibration. Ethiopia's message was implicit but unmistakable. Partnerships are evaluated by outcomes, not intentions. As industrial zones expanded and employment stabilized, Ethiopia's trajectory gained momentum. The decision to turn toward India had not closed doors elsewhere. It had opened leverage. That leverage reshaped negotiations across sectors. Ethiopia no longer asked whether jobs were possible. It planned for how many. The difference defined the era. India had delivered scale when urgency demanded it. Ethiopia had seized the opportunity without surrendering control. The result was not dependency, it was capacity, and capacity changes everything. The partnership continued evolving, shaped by production targets rather than politics. Ethiopia's labor force grew more skilled, India's manufacturing footprint diversified, the United States reassessed engagement through a new lens. Africa watched closely. The lesson was not about choosing India over the United States. It was about choosing execution over hesitation. Ethiopia had made that choice, and 75,000 jobs made it irreversible.